The fact is that testing is really helpful. It can help you to figure out where your trouble spots are. And God is very present in testing believers. I say that because when believers get tested, they sort of have this, God, what happened? And he's going, I'm putting you through a test so you can see where the problem is. The issue is that a lot of us don't appreciate the test when we're in it. So, we left off our story in Exodus 15. And when we did that, the real tests of the desert began. But these are just the beginning ones. The real tests of the desert begin to start becoming clear. Some of the test is for Moses as a leader. Some of the test is for the people as followers. And then later on, there'll even be a third layer. Those will be the leaders among the people that are kind of between Moses and the people. Let me see if I can spool off a couple of tests. Go back to 15:22 to 27. Exodus 15:22 to 27. Let me call this the obedience test. What is the obedience test based on what we talked about before I left for lunch?
God brought them to a place where it was gonna be uncomfortable for them, but they still had to, it was still a lesson and there's still a process that they had to follow in order to get the right lesson out of it.
In my view, Mara was for the people what grabbing the snake's tail was for Moses. Do what's counterintuitive, but right. Obey me, even if it doesn't seem like it's a good idea. I think that's what they were doing. But when you look at the progression, there was a pattern that you're going to see repeated over and over and over. Let me see if I can make this pattern clear. First, there was disappointment in verse 23. They came to Mara, they could not drink the water. Their disappointment. Second, they're facing an insurmountable problem and God sends deliverance. So they have disappointment followed by a deliverance where God makes the water potable so that they can drink it, right? Then they get a directive. He says, next time I tell you to do this anyway because I'm working a plan. So you go from disappointment to deliverance to a directive. And where did we end just before we left? Downtime. They got to downtime and they arrived at a place of rest with water and they needed no further test. And this was a time when they could just enjoy the delights of God and they could relax. And then the second test came. The second test is in 16:1 to 3, and then 8 to 12. Okay, I know that's broke up. 16:1 to 3, and 8 to 12. I'm going to call this the goal test, G-O-A-L, the goal test. First of all, I want to give you the symptoms for the need for the test. Okay, look at verses 1 to 3. In order to achieve success or attain a goal, you have to have a deliberate mind. It's one of the things you need. The test is aimed at mind and focus. Look at 1 through 3. Then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out to this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. They're hungry and they're groaning. All right? Now, here's what I want you to see. First, there was a fear. They were now a month after their departure from Egypt. They're 30 days into this journey according to 16:1. And they have left Elim, they have left the 12 wells of water, the 70 date palms, and where they were camping. By the way, I've told you this in the past, but the problem that we have with the numbers in the book of Exodus it really tell us that if you have 12 wells of water and you have something as elegant as 70 date palms, but you had, say, 3 million people, that wouldn't get you enough water. You can't pump enough water out with buckets to actually feed that many. And the issue is that we probably misunderstood and mistranslated the single word Eleph. The word Eleph, which means bands, clans, tribes, families, or thousands, has been translated in the Hebrew scriptures as thousands. And so what happens is, later on in Numbers, when they count the people and there's 603 Elephim, 550, we say, well, there's 603,550 men who can string a bow. If all of them are married, that's 1.2 million. If they have 2 children, that's 2.4 million. And that's how we get those numbers. But if the term Aleph is not thousand, but rather bands, and a band is 20, then the original cast is probably 35 to 50,000 people coming through the wilderness. Does that make sense? The problem's not the word of God. The problem's our translation. Because the word can mean band, clan, tribes, families, or thousands.
What's the Hebrew word?
Aleph, like elephant.
Okay.
It's spelled the same way. Aleph is the common Hebrew word for 1,000. But it also meant other things. Aluf, by the way, is the word for captain. Okay, like as in salute him. Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet. Head, or beginning, or the head guy, and 1,000 was a grouping term. So we can't, that's where we get the idea of bands. It could have been bands of people. How big is a band? Say arbitrarily 20. Well, if there's 603 bands plus 550 rabble, 603 men who are bands, that means that there's, now let's say they're all married, and that's 1,200 plus 550 plus their children, and that puts you more in the 35 to 50,000 range. That's how you do it. Now, there's a reason why I believe that's true. I believe, first of all, I've walked the whole territory. 3 million people won't fit in the territory. No, they physically, I'm serious, they can't fit. This is without the flocks, herds, and tents. They can't fit. By the way, if you have 3 million people crossing over the Red Sea, the group that's the first group in is halfway to Sinai by the time the last group can get on, if you're going to have people move onto the land. It's too many. It doesn't fit in the space. At the end, when they all are, Moses, Deuteronomy 34, Moses is overviewing the promised land, and it says, and the people were encamped in the valley before him. The valley before him, are you kidding me? If Moses is looking over at Mount Nebo and Deuteronomy 34, they would have to be all the way up to the Sea of Galilee and all the way down to the Red Sea. You can't put 1 million people in a spot, in a little box, okay? If there's 3 or 4 million of them, they've taken up the entire landscape. So I think what you're talking about is a much smaller number. I think you need to remember that when they got to Elim, they were all thirsty. They had no water. And when they got there, 12 wells of water got enough for all of them. I'd like you to tell me how you could do that for 3 million people. Do you know how fast those buckets were moving? I mean, you couldn't even see them. They were like atomically fast buckets in order to feed these people before they died. They would have all died of thirst before they could have ever gotten enough buckets to actually bring the water out. The problem is this. I know you probably, I don't want to disappoint you. You've probably seen these emails where, God miraculously brought them 47 railroad cars of food plus 77 tanker trucks full of water every day through the wilderness. The problem is when you mistranslate the word, then you have to create a whole bunch of miracles that aren't in the text in order to make the text work. They're not saying they got to Elim and there were 12 wells of water and miraculously the water flew out and got into their mouth. It's not in the text. So I'm going to suggest to you that the numbers of the cast in the Bible may be smaller than the numbers of Cecil B. DeMille's actual recalling of the text when he did the movie, okay? The movie might be bigger than the original cast, is what I'm saying. Okay, here's what I do know. I do know that these people were filled with fear. And I do know that they were uncomfortable. And I do know that they'd been a month coming out. And here's what I want you to see. The problem with the fear that they had was it blocked out faith. The issue is, in the interior of Sinai, if they went 100 kilometers southeast of the Suez Canal, you would find that they were in an area where there were plenty of springs. The location, by the way, for Elim is debated. I traveled that route, and the location is debated. And here's what I can tell you. By the time they got a month out, they had a Back to Egypt committee. That's what I know. They had a whole bunch of people join the so we want to go back to Egypt committee. And people are starting to grumble because you can't see faith through fear, but you can't see fear through faith. The problem is they're so afraid they don't think God can pull off what's obvious in front of them, that it's going to be hard to get through the desert with this many people and not die of thirst. So what do? They start whining. They start fussing. And then they forget all the things that God has done, because we have a selective memory. When we face trouble, what we forget is what God brought us through already. God, who was able to slay the firstborn of the Egyptians, to do all 10 of the 10 plagues, to part the waters of the sea, cannot somehow find a way to fill my canteen with water. That's what we do. The redemption miracle is huge until we get tested. And then all of a sudden we forget how big the redemption miracle was. Okay, I want you to go down to verse 8 for a second. 16:8. Moses said, "This will happen when the Lord gives you meat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord." I want you to remember that they made a wrong diagnosis. The Lord provided for their needs, and they should have quickly realized that. And the bottom line is they're accusing Moses when Moses didn't get them out of Egypt. God did. When things go wrong, people tend to ascribe that to the human that they see, not the God behind the human. And the reality is that when we're hurting and we're needy, we don't easily see other people. We end up buried in the pile. And so I want you to see what happens. Their failed relationship with the Lord was at the beginning of their grumbling. And by the way, so it is in our life. When you start grumbling, it really started with your relationship with God. When your relationship with God is good and you are walking with him in strength, you're not grumbling. The children of Israel thought their number one obstacle and issue was their leadership. They thought, you know what the problem we got? Moses. He's the problem. The problem is their real problem was departure from God. That was their real problem. While they're saying Moses blew it, what they're saying underneath of it is God is blowing it. Why? Because we're not comfortable. This isn't working the way we thought it would work. I want you to look at their divided hearts for a minute. Go down to verse 9. And I want you to see that the children of Israel looked one way, but thought another. Look, they talked freedom, but dreamed slavery. They talked promised land, but dreamed Egypt. They have a divided heart. It says this in verse 9. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumblings." It came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "I have heard the grumbling of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God." When we recognize the Lord heard our whining, we may be afraid he's going to judge us, but we, if we don't back away from him, will discover new things about God and his character. God's not like us. When we test him, God is not an egotist. I know it's hard to see because he walks around saying, "I am the greatest." That's just a function of truth. He is. He's not an egotist. He's not thrown off his game because people whine at him. I want you to see that in 16:10, we're going to learn about his glory. In 16:12, they learn about his provision. Second half of 16:12, they learn that he's the master of all things. 16, 13, 14, 15, they learn that he's creative in the way he cares for us. God was about to give them breakfast cereal for the morning and quail for the evening grill. He was going to come through. To think about Egypt, their minds would slip across the burning desert sands and back across the sea where some slime bricks and slavery was forgotten. And all they could remember is the smell of leeks, and they kept thinking about how wonderful it was. See, their freedom was in Canaan, but their full stomach was back in Egypt. And God was saying, would you rather stay in bondage than pay the price for freedom? Which would you rather do? This is a test about your focus. You can't keep looking back to your past life and enjoying your past life thinking you're going to get progress in your walk with God. That isn't going to happen. So the key to the focus test is this. We need to keep our eyes on the Lord during our journey, not just the destination, but the one who's going with us. Look, it's not enough to just know that God wants you to walk with Him and finally be with Him in heaven. You got to be paying attention to Him right now. You got to grab His hand and walk with Him now. It's not enough to know that you're going to eventually know Jesus. You got to walk with Him, because if you don't do that, life is too hard and the problems are too big and you're going to get stuck. Look at verse 4. I skipped over verse 4. I did it on purpose. The Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them." Underline it, that I may test them. You would think that He said that I may feed them. That's not what He said. He said that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction. Listen to me very carefully, because this is going to be a hard one. God provides for us, not simply to provide for us, but to test the stewardship of His provision. You have what you have, not only to provide for your needs, but also to test how well God can invest things with you and how you will use them. And by the way, the test is not for God, it's for you. So God bestows on you a gift that belongs to someone else. He puts it in your heart that you are to give it to them. And you put it in your drawer, and you don't give it to them. And what did God learn? Nothing. What did you learn about yourself?
You follow God to a limit.
Yeah, and you can't really be trusted if the money gets up above this amount. We all have a price. We have to learn how easy it is for us to slip into wrong behaviors. So I'm going to call 16:4 the consistency test. Let me say it another way. Use only as directed. Now, here's what the text says. It starts off in 4 with, I'm going to give them daily bread, and it's going to test their obedience. How does bread test obedience? Well, look, if the consistency test is about obedience, not once, but ongoing, the daily grind of serving another's goals goes against our nature. I don't want to do what somebody else makes me do every day. Do you? I want to get up in the morning and take care of me. And I got to tell you, it's a wrestling match. When you get up with a crying baby, the thing is, it's either you make him a bottle or you get to eat. But if you get to eat, you're going to eat with him crying because he wants a bottle, right? Now, it's not as hard as I'm making it sound. If you have any compassion at all for a child, you realize that they don't have any other choice. They don't have like a vocabulary saying, hey, I'm really hungry over here. They have like, cry. That's what they have. Wet, cry. Hungry, cry. You know? Stomach upset, cry. They don't have any other vocabulary. So you sort of get that and you just kind of go with it. Now, here's the thing. Dependence on the Lord isn't blind faith. It comes with instructions from God's Word. So God starts showering on them food. He starts giving them day by day food. Now, I want to ask you something. Why do you suppose God had it rain manna and they had to go out and get it from baskets and put it in baskets and bring it in? How come He just didn't deliver it in like Wonder Bread bags already made into peanut butter sandwiches? Why? Why would that be incredibly important?
Humans are made for working. If we don't do work, we do.
Okay, for one thing, we are made for working. But for another thing, remember, what's their destination? Where are they heading? Canaan. And when God cuts off the raining bread, what are they going to have to do to get bread? Go out every day into the field and work for it. And what He's doing is training a group of people that have been 10 generations slaves. Guess how they got bread in Egypt? It was delivered to them because they went out and made bricks, came back, and here there was a feeding station. They walked up and got food. They didn't have to go get it. He had to train a group of slaves to be farmers. And the way to train them is to go out into the field every day and pick up exactly what they're supposed to pick up. So what they're learning is Look at 16:17 for a minute. Look at I want you to zero into this. It says, the sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much, and some gathered little. What was the instruction God gave them as to how much they were to gather?
Exactly what they needed for each.
Okay, you gather for the day, except for one day. On the 6th day, what do?
Have a double portion.
You gather a double portion. What happens if on day 3 you decide to gather a double portion? Can you skip day 4? No, it goes bad. So God literally, chemically deals with what they have to train them to get things. By the way, it's interesting because obedience is time sensitive. Did you notice that? Obedience is time sensitive. When God gave them an obedience command, he said, I want you to do it exactly this way. And by the way, you can't do it any other way. No other timing works. So it says this. Verse 21 says, they gathered morning by morning, every man as much as he should eat. But when the sun grew hot, it would melt. In 1627, it says, it came about on the 7th day that some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. Why? It's Sabbath. You're not supposed to be out there gathering on Sabbath. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, this same idea was repeated many, many times in Scripture. Listen to 2 Thessalonians 3:10 for a minute. For even when we were with you, we used to give you this order. If anyone is not willing to work, then he's not to eat either. For we hear that some of you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. Now such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to work in a quiet fashion and eat their own bread. But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. The point of the passage is, I want you to do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it and not get tired of doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. But the key to consistency and the consistency test is we can't expect God to take care of everything with us without us having to do anything. That's not the deal. We're supposed to work with this. See, everybody can easily go, well, if God is good, I can sit here and he'll make me a peanut butter sandwich. But frankly, God is your heavenly father, not your heavenly mama. God is more interested that you learn how to get up, get a job, and do it. Not that someone come and put pie in front of you. Say, I have a mom and I have a dad. My dad's not going to get up, run to the counter, cut me a piece of pie, and run it over to me. My mom, on the other hand, will. I have a heavenly father. Now, I want you to notice one other test, okay? So we've got this consistency test. Can everybody describe what the consistency test is? What's the consistency test?
Do what you have to do every day. Don't get tired of doing it.
Yeah, and every 6th day, double do it, and every 7th day, don't do it. Do exactly what I use only as directed, and do it consistently. Now, let me give you another test. This is 16:16 to 36. This is another test. This is test number 4. I have the limitation test is my title for it. So did we get the consistency test is number 3, and the goal test is number 2, and all the way back in number 1, the obedience test, okay? At the end of 15 is the obedience test, then you get to the goal test and these other. Okay, the limitation test, 16:16 to 36. Look at 16:16. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece, according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. The sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much, and some gathered little. When they measured it with an omer, which is meaning the bucket shape of an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. Moses said to them, let no man leave any of it until morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some of them left it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul. And Moses was angry with them. They gathered it morning by morning, every man as much as he should eat. But when the sun grew hot, it should melt. Now on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observance, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, boil what you will boil, and all that is left over, put it aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning as Moses had ordered. and it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is the Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, and on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. It came about on the seventh day that some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse my commandments and my instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you bread for 2 days on the sixth day. Remain every man in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. The house of Israel named it manna. Manhu just means it is what it is, or it is what is it. It's actually probably a question. Manna sounds like grammatically it is what is it, meaning we don't know what it is. The answer in the Bible is what is manna is they didn't know, and we don't either. It was something God made for them. And in verse 31, the house of Israel named it manna. It was like coriander seed white, and it tastes like wafers with honey. Then Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omerful of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness. That brought you out of the land of Egypt. Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omerful of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer was a tenth of an ephah. Now, before we go on, let's just stop here for a second. Look at this test. The test here is learning to set limits. The other one was about the daily observance. This is about limits. First, the amount of food is specified. Second, when to eat it was specified. If you held it over till the next day, it became foul and wormy. Third, when to gather it was specified. You had to do it in the morning. You had to do it every morning except for the seventh morning. Fourth, the plan was specified. There was an opportunity to do it for the Sabbath weekly, and this is how you got your seventh day allotment. And the fifth thing was when you're supposed to rest was also specified. In other words, a simple request for food gets translated into them showing limitation and doing it the way God said, limiting the amount they were supposed to get. Did you get from this reading that he's all about the amount? Omer, less than an omer, double omer. It's all about the amount. Here's the problem. In our culture, gluttony is not a sin. There's nothing wrong with looking out for tomorrow in our culture. And in fact, when it becomes an opportunity to hoard things, we hoard things. You know, I have heard a lot of sermons on a lot of sin, but I've never heard anybody preach against hoarding. We're living in days of all-you-can-eat buffets, and come on, some people go in there and they eat twice what they should because they paid for it and they want to get every bit of the money they put out. We stop at the food spread and we eat until we can't move. And truthfully, our culture is all about self-indulgence, is it not? So, the limitation test is about what?
Only taking what you need every day.
You take what you need and you do it according to what the Lord provides, and you do it with a knowledge of the other people around you. Did you notice that they knew what their neighbors were picking up? And that they were willing. What happens if somebody's legs are broke? You make them crawl out into the desert and pick up their omer? People have to help each other out. To make this work, they have to help each other out. The whole idea here, is God is training them to each be involved in the limitations and the tests. But these tests are important. All right, we've got an obedience test. We've got ourselves a goal test, consistency test, limitation test. Let me give you a fifth test. This one's in 17. And the fifth test picks up 1 through 7. I'm going to call this the trust test. The trust test. The problem was God needed to test the people. How do I know that these are tests? Hey, by the way, are you following how I got that these are tests of God to the people? You have to just look for the word, but it keeps showing up to test them. To test them. So, is it God messing with you in your life when He's given you only as much as you need and no more? Is it God messing with you in your life when He gives you more than you need but asks you not to pick it up? What God is doing is training a group of people on a camping trip so that they'll learn how to be a nation. They'll go from being a rabble of slaves to a nation, to think together as a community, to understand what the other guy needs next door in the other tent. Listen to this in verse 1. Then all the congregation of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of Sin. According to the command of the Lord, they camped at Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." Boy, you're starting to see that they haven't really gone that far, and this thing just goes over and over and over. And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and they grumbled against Moses and said, "Why have you now brought us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" You know, every time they have a problem with Moses, they go right back to, "You want us dead, don't you? You want us dead, don't you? You want us dead, don't you?" Let me tell you something. If they keep saying it, I'm thinking he's going to say, "Yes, boom, that's it." No, that's not really what's going to happen. But here's the truth. Does it not bother you that they keep misunderstanding the leader to the point where they act like he really wants him dead? You're just doing this to mess with me. Guess what they're really saying? They're really saying, "You're just doing this to mess with me." They're doing this with God. They're saying it to Moses, but they're angling it toward God. "You brought us out of here. You raised us to be slaves. What kind of God are you anyway? I had my back beaten, and now you put me here in the middle of the wilderness. What kind of God are you anyway?" What they're mad about happened to them at birth. They're still walking around with a big chip on their shoulder, and God is chipping away the chip. Here's what it says, verse 4. Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do to this people? A little more, and they will stone me." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people, and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he named the place Massah and Meribah. That's the place of quarreling and wrestling, because of the quarrel of the sons of Israel, because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Look at the end, because that's the key to the test. What are they really asking? Is God really here? Is God engaged? Does God understand? Does He know what it's like following Him? I'm down here hungry and thirsty watching my children choke on dust. And this is after we got out of slavery. Now, here's what I want you to see. In 17:1, there's a note that you probably won't understand. The geographical note is that they were moving further into the harsh lands. If I take you out to the Sinai, what you'll find is that when you move from Sin out toward Horeb, you go through Rephidim. Rephidim Valley is a deep sand and very arduous, tough journey part. So they get to a part of the land. Rafad is actually like a comfortable place. But what they're talking about is that it's not that it's comfortable, it's that it's soft ground. Now, did you ever walk on the beach up on the dry part? You know how much harder it is to walk there? That's where they just got to the place where the sand is really deep. So what I want you to see is all the congregation journeyed by stages, and they came and camped in Rephidim. So they're in a dry, and this time when the wind blows, the sand hits you in the face. This isn't rock and lunar landscape. This is sand landscape. Great for lying down, not great for pretty much anything else. So it's got a soft bed to it, but you can't really walk around that well. And so there they are, and it says that they had moved into this harsh place. And here's what I want you to notice. How did they get there? Notice the second phrase in verse 1.
According to the command of the Lord?
Yeah, God brought them there. They got to a tough place. Second phrase, God brought them to the tough place. And here's the thing, the third phrase, the place didn't have what they needed. I need you to see what he's doing. They got to a tough place. God led them to the tough place. The place didn't have what they needed. That's what verse 1 says. And what's interesting is, it seems wrong. The human body is 2/3 water. By the time you're 70 years old, you will have required 1.5 million gallons of water in your body. And studies show that an increasing water consumption can decrease fat deposits. So if you'd like to lose weight, drink more. Water is an appetite suppressant, by the way. Australian pain expert Dr. Michael Farrell's study says that without a drink, you become more sensitive to pain. If you're having trouble with pain, drink more water. It actually helps your sensitivity to decrease. Just so that you know, if you lose 2% of your body's water supply, your energy decreases by 20%. Most Americans have too little sleep and drink too little water. That is why we are underproductive as a people. By the way, if you have a 10% decrease in water, you will be unable to walk. 20%, you're dead. A camel can take on multiple times that, but you cannot. You need the water that's in your body. If the water is evaporating off of your... By the way, when I take you to the Middle East, one of the things I'm going to tell you is you breathe in dry air and you exhale moisture, so you are dehydrating by breathing in a desert environment. You are losing half a bottle to a bottle of water an hour in the desert. So it doesn't take long. If every hour you're losing a bottle of water and you're not putting it back in, you are dehydrating. Now, what is the trust test? The trust test is this. The problem wasn't water, it was trust. It looks like the problem is water, but that's not what the problem is. The problem is the Lord among us or not? That's the problem. Because if the Lord is here, then I'm fine. I'll have what I need. But Exodus records the reactions of the people, and this is a perfect model for all the wrong responses. Look at the way they reacted. First, they quarreled with Moses, and they acted as though there was a conspiracy. You really want us dead, don't you? Do you know people like this? Something goes wrong, and the first thing is, you just wanted me to fail, didn't you? The crazy part is that there's the conspiracy. But look, one of the things they do is they act as though there's a conspiracy by other people in their life, and they skip the hints of God and they focus on other people. Now, what I find interesting is the second thing that they do is blame people for what God is doing. Did you ever do this? Blame people for what God is doing. God led them. That's the second phrase of 17:1. And yet they were going, Moses, you brought us out here because you really want us to die. Yes, that's really right. I was in Midian enjoying my wife, having a nice time with my flocks. I walked here, had to go through 10 plagues and drag you people out here because I'd like to kill you all. Really what I am is a mass murderer, not a deliverer, and I'm just having fun with you. Honestly, Moses could have been a comedian by this point. The other thing is that people do is they ascribe motives to people that uncover why they're causing the discomfort in their lives. After all, by now, you should be able to read their hearts and flawlessly judge their motives. I see through who you really are. You came to deliver us ostensibly, but really you hate us. You loved it when Pharaoh made us make bricks without giving us straw. You loved that, didn't you, Moses? Tell us the truth. Come on, tell us. And Moses is like going, hey, can somebody just, yes, you're right. I would like to call down fire from heaven, make you all toast, and get out of here, okay? If Moses didn't start off this way, he would have ended up this way. But here's the thing. God isn't only instructing the people, he's also teaching Moses. Moses has to be pushed to the edge. Why? Because he's of no value to God as long as he thinks he can pull this off without God. He has to get to the place where he knows that without God, he cannot even make a day. Did you all see how he's learning it? The school of tough knocks, right? And by the way, one of the things that people do when they grumble, did you read what they were doing? Look at verse 3. Forget any blessing God may have given you. By the way, look at verse 3. What are they worried about?
Dying of thirst.
Yeah. Now go to the end of verse 3. To kill us and what? And our children and what? Where did slaves get livestock?
They kind of looted the Egyptians.
Yeah, let's just go back and remember, hello, you have livestock because I gave it to you. Yeah, and the children the same way, but in a very real way, even as slaves they had children, but as slaves did they own livestock? It's hard to complain about the livestock you didn't even have until God gave it to you, or is it? If they took the time to think about it, so far, this is what God has provided. Let's do a quick overview. Opening heart of Pharaoh. Unexpected showering of gifts by their former masters. Cloud and fire navigation GPS system through the desert. Escape corridor through the sea on dry land. Water wells at Mara, okay, downside, a little bit of diarrhea, but Elim, good wells. Frosted mini wheats in the desert and quail roasters. All these were theirs, and here we are, and they're going, you just want us to die. Yeah, right. God went to an extraordinary effort to just go out there and kill them all, right? Now, verse 4, not only do you forget all the blessings you have, but in verse 4, what you do is you push the leaders to the edge because you become threatening and nasty. By the way, I think it's important for us to remember that these are the kinds of reactions we have a lot in our lives. Get down to verses 5 to 7. Here's God's answer to these people who are getting uppity with God. Then the Lord said to Moses, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your staff, which you struck the Nile, and go. Look at the model. In verse 5, God set the leader in front of the people. He said, walk out in front of the people. Second half of verse 5, get other people to see that God is working. And so God uses the time to train people, because that was the point of the discomfort to begin with. He's trying to train the people. The time of discomfort was about trust and obedience and confidence in Him. Look, the bottom line is this: as long as you believe that you can build a comfortable life that is sufficient for a wilderness trip, you will never learn to trust God in the wilderness. You won't need to. As long as you walk around going, well, I'll serve God as long as He fills my belly. God doesn't have your heart, and He doesn't have your will, and He doesn't have what really fulfills you. See, the problem is we keep running into, and especially in our day, we have a lot of people whose God is their belly. They are willing to follow God as long as their bank account gets bigger for doing it. They're willing to follow God as long as He's full of prosperity for them. They're all about what they get. Their God is their belly. And the problem is God doesn't want to just fill your belly. He wants to fill your heart. 1 Corinthians 10:4 says, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them. The rock was Christ. Listen. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things are for our examples, to the intent that we would not lust after evil things as they lusted. Paul said, look back to the wilderness and the people walking through the wilderness. You know what their whole life was about? Their life and its record was to instruct us in faith. That's what he said. We are to be learning our faith from this. So the issue is control and fulfillment, and that's always been what it is. Now, what did he tell him to take with him? Do you remember? Go out in front of him and take something with you. Take the stick. Remember the one that turns into snakes and parts seas? I think he took the stick, and I think God instructed him to take the stick in part because it told Moses God was about to do a great work. Because whenever he said, take your stick with you, God did something cool. So I think Moses was feeling pretty beat down. Oh God, I don't know what I'm going to do with these people. He says, see that stick over there in the corner? Oh yeah, that one that does the cool things? Yeah, go get it. Okay, all right. Now walk with your stick. Dun, 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 dun. And he comes walking out in front of them. You know, one of the things I want you to remember is when you get into a tested time as a leader, we can all make a long list of the things we don't have. I don't have enough money, I don't have a good education, I don't have a high social standing. Here's the thing. God told him to take what he did have. Take the stick. And though it seems weak and small and insignificant, you take what God gives you and you use it and God fills it. The difference is the power of God, not the stick. But if it gives you confidence to have the symbol of the stick for the power of God, then that's what you need. Now, I think one of the other things is that he walks out. Let me say it this way. One of the greatest problems we have as believers is we have a tendency to underestimate what God has already given us. You're going to get to hard places in your life, and you're going to feel like, man, this is a problem, and I don't know what to do. Do you know how many people are invested in your life and your growth? Do you have any idea right now how many people are praying for you and investing in this year alongside of you, asking God to do a work in your life? You're not just sitting in class. I know of 12 people that are praying for each of you. Your faces aren't out there on that board so that, we can pretty up the place. I mean, it's nice, you look good and everything, but it's because people are walking in and out of there. They're praying for you guys. They want to see God work in your life and really grab your heart during the time that you've committed to letting Him do that. What I want you to understand is Moses had to get to the place where he recognized that he was valuable to God. He had to get to the place. He had to follow the place where God told him. And in verse 6, he had to get to that place and understand that he had Jehovah's writing on his life. And so he had to go out there and do what God called him to do. I think it's kind of significant to me anyway, as I look at the text, that God called him, I will stand before you there at the rock of Horeb. I'm going to be there. So show up, do what I told you, and I'll meet you there. I'll show up. Now, I don't know if Moses is thinking he's going to split the mountain in two. I have no idea what he thinks is going to happen. But I figure that he knows water is going to come out. Now, I want to tell you something. And if I didn't see it and know how to do it, I would doubt this. Let me read you a story first, and then I'll explain. This story comes from the 1930s. It comes from Major C.S. Jarvis. It comes from a journal called the Palestine Exploration Fund. Several men of the Sinai Camel Corps had halted in a dry wadi and were in the process of digging about in the rough sand that had accumulated at the foot of a rock face. They were trying to get at the water that was trickling out slowly from the limestone rock. The men were taking their time about it, and Besh Shawish, the color sergeant, said, "Here, give it to me." He took the spade of one of the men and began to dig furiously in the manner that NCOs the world over who want to show their men how to do things but have no intention of keeping it up for more than a couple of minutes, do it. One of the violent blows of the spade hit the rock face by mistake. The smooth, hard crust that had formed on the weathered limestone split open and fell away. The soft stone underneath was thereby exposed, and out of its apertures shot a powerful stream of water. The Sudanese, who are well up in the activities of the prophets, but do not treat them with a vast amount of respect, were overwhelmed with their sergeant with cries that said, "Look at him, it's Prophet Moses." Let me explain. I can take you to the desert, and I can fill up your canteens with water in a dry desert. I know how to do it. I can watch the lines of sedimentary rock when they match metamorphic rock, and they will form a seam, and you will not see them if you are not trained to look for them. But what happens is water comes down from rain, and it goes through porous rock, and then it hits rock that has no opening in it, and it works its way out to the surface. But when it comes out to the surface, it carries with it calcium deposits. So that, I don't know have any of you have driven on the turnpike through western Pennsylvania? Anybody do that? You go straight across western Pennsylvania, you will see places where they cut the highway, and on both sides of it, there's actually wet on the wall. If you go out there and pull off, which you're not allowed to do because it's a turnpike, but if you did, you could go out there and whack that, and if you hit it, it'll chip off the outside and water will pour out. They're in places where metamorphic rock and sedimentary rock meet. They're in geological formation. Sinai is one of those places. I know how to take you to Sinai and fill up your canteens by banging on rocks. It's not a miracle. I know how to do it. By the way, so did Moses. Moses knew how to do. How do I know? Do you know where Horeb is? Horeb is near where God called him in the beginning. He's already been here. He used to have flocks running around here. This is not an unusual place for him. So what I'm saying is, he knows how to get water from a rock. The miracle here isn't that water came from a rock. The miracle here is that God stored up enough rainwater over the last 200 years to have enough water there for all of them. That's what the miracle was. In other words, the miracle was 200 years long, not one afternoon. God sends him out there and says, now look very carefully at the account. Somebody pick up the reading, let's say in verse 7, 17:7, and read to the, no, that's too late. Somebody read verses 6 and 7 out loud.
Behold, I will stand before you here, there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He named the place Massah and Meribah, because the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not?
Now, what I want you to see is here he was called to strike the rock. The next time he's called to do what? Talk to it, and he strikes it. Why? Because the next time, it wasn't that he was mad. It's that he did what he knew instead of doing what he was told. This is where he's told to strike the rock, and that makes sense to him. But he also knows the desert and they don't. And God is trying to take care of not just one person. I can fill up a couple of canteens, but I can't fill up 50,000 canteens. I mean, I don't have that. I don't even know any place in the wilderness that can fill up that many. God did. He took them to the right spot. Now, he knew how to do it, but he didn't supply it. God did. So right there, water comes pouring out of the rock, and everybody goes, oh, Moses, you're like incredible. But Moses is not incredible. He knows how to do it. God is incredible because he's given them enough to meet their need. The point is, in verse 7, they marked the spot. They recognized the lesson. And I need you to see that because you're going to see this again. The lesson is God with us or is he not? That's the question. The trust test is not about the water. It's not about the stomach. It's about the will and about the heart.